Hello and welcome to the TelecomTV Summit on Open RAN. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and coming up now is our discussion on the Open RAN ecosystem. Are we seeing the longed-for diversity in the vendor supply chain and the corresponding increase in innovation? Or does an enlarged marketplace ultimately result in more work and complications for network operators? And how will the emergence of the RIC impact the Open RAN ecosystem? Well, let's find out what our guests think, and I am delighted to introduce Paul Crane, Network Research Director at BT, Rimma Iontel, Chief Architect, TME Technology Strategy and Execution Office at Red Hat, and Gil Hellmann, Head of Global Technical Telco Sales at Wind River. Hello everyone, good to see you all. Thanks for taking part in our programme. Now, the Open RAN movement has been largely motivated by and driven by operators, which is something of a departure from recent past. How do we think the vendor ecosystem has reacted to this drive to Open RAN? Has it welcomed it, or is there still some resistance? Rimma, perhaps I could start by asking you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here, first of all. And well, it's a bit of a departure for RAN space, but if you think back to NFV, that was already being driven by operators. So RAN vendors should have expected this change in how operators participate. It shouldn't have been a shock to them, in my opinion. When we started NFV movement, operators were the driving force behind it. They were the ones who realized the opportunities it presented to them in the choices it could make about the network, and then moving on to applying it to RAN was a logical choice. And the effect it's had on incumbents versus on the newcomers is slightly different. I think newcomers see it as an opportunity that operators are more open to welcome them into the networks. And incumbents see it a little bit as a threat because, first of all, there are more newcomers coming in, of course. But second is they have a lot of legacy stuff that they're applying to the new RAN technologies. For them to adapt something like an Open RAN, they need to make a lot of changes, maybe a lot more than they would have done otherwise. And they've seen operators taking active role and active interests in how things are implemented. So they probably understand they cannot get away with the proprietary solutions. They have to abide by the open ecosystem that operators are looking for. And I think for them it was a bit of an adoption.
Thanks, Rimma. Well, Paul, from the operator perspective, how do you think the vendors have reacted to the move towards Open RAN?
I think it's worth starting by looking at a slightly wider picture. Open RAN is part of that much bigger picture of the shift towards virtualization and disaggregation of functionality, then overlaid with open architectures, and that's impacting all parts of a telecom infrastructure. It's kind of, I think it's the biggest change that I've seen in my career about the way we go about building networks. So it's a radical transformation. So it's not surprising that there's different approaches from existing and new players in the industry, all effectively trying to work out where in this new world, how is it going to develop, how are they going to add value, effectively to us, to operators in the end. My view is that it is actually it is really an exciting opportunity for all vendors in this space. It does. And particularly those that present us as end customers with options, options to deliver solutions which are optimized for our particular environment, APIs to allow us to innovate new services. So there's a variety of reactions at the moment, but I don't think that's surprising. As Open RAN matures, I think we will see a much more consolidated approach.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. As you say, as this is very young, recent development. So as the market for open matures, things will no doubt change. I'm sure we'll see consolidation. Gil, let me bring you into this particular conversation.
Sure, yes. Thank you, Guy, and thank you for having me here. I agree with Rimma, and if you really look at what happened with NFV, it already started with the 4G days, with the cores. Like everything in life, you start with a baby step, you walk, you run. I think we're getting with the RAN side right into the walk, slash run. It's operators already did it before. They did it a few years with NFE. Smaller magnitude, it was the core. The core, it's a much smaller magnitude than the radio access network side of things. And now they're ready to take the next step, and they're doing it. It's not a surprise. The business environment really drives them and demand them to be agile, to introduce new services quickly, to be able to move quickly when capacity need to be increased, new services. It's not a surprise.
And Gil, do you think, because one of the goals of Open RAN was to increase diversity in the vendor supply chain, do you think that is being achieved?
It is definitely. I would not say that it reached the peak point. It's just starting. A great example. It's both Red Hat here and Wind River, we're suppliers now or partners to those operators that in the past you wouldn't see us directly working with an operator. We would either be used through other vendors that provided the entire solution and be embedded inside, or not at all. And so this is a great example. And there is also a lot of newcomers, smaller companies, both, for example, company that makes RU, that makes DUs, virtualized, that you wouldn't see before.
Yeah, thanks, Gil. Paul, are you seeing that increased diversity in the supply chain?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't look at the trade press daily. You see a new announcement of someone producing a component or a solution in Open RAN. So that there's clearly lots of attempts to get that diversity going. I think it is, as we were saying, it's still very early days. It's still very early days. I think it's going to be a while before operators can really confidently build an Open RAN based solution that would rival the performance, the economics that you can buy from a traditional vendor for your main network. I think earlier implementations around almost specialist use cases around that network, I think will happen first. So diversity is happening. We're not there yet. I do think it's a trend which is happening. It's gaining momentum. It's great to see industry organizations pushing this forward. Particularly I'd call out the Open RAN Alliance, of course, but also the Telco Infra Project, TIP, in their various roles in actually trying to get this ecosystem up and running.
Thanks, Paul. And Rimma, what's your view on the diversification of the supply chain?
So it's actually very encouraging to see all the new companies that are jumping on the bandwagon of the Open RAN, both from the point of view of creating components like DU, CU, RU, but also we're seeing new just software companies that are looking at RIC and XApps, right? And that's where I'm personally curious to see what's going to develop, because that has a very direct impact on what the capabilities of the RAN might be, right? On the new services that we haven't thought of. That's where I think the new blood is going to come from, the new ideas, the unexpected, developments and services. One concern I have, and that might be a question for Paul, is operators ready to welcome those and include them in the network ecosystem, because they will directly affect the actual radio networks. And I've seen in the past that operators are very conservative. When somebody is touching the bread and butter which is what RAN is. So that's something I'm really looking forward to seeing if that's going to work out, or if they're going to wait for these little companies to be acquired by bigger players and only then start adapting some of those new options.
Yeah, thank you, Rimma. Good points. We're going to touch on the RIC a little bit later. Well, let's ask Paul that question because, Paul, the downside of this perhaps is that operators now need to deal with many more commercial suppliers, more points of contact, more contracts, not always desirable. Two things. One, is this leading to some kind of pre-bundling model where you just retain your trust in those historic partner relationships? And as Rimma says, what about the new players, many of which are perhaps unproven?
Yeah, I think to your list of potential issues, I think I would add in-life support and fault resolution to that list as well. It's a different model. Now, I think to an extent we're going to end up with a horses for courses approach. There will be, some operators that have got, deep technical skills and the ambition that will do their own integration. There are others that will do, some parts of the integration, and some that will just want to, buy a turnkey solution from an integrator, and that integrator may well be, one of the existing large vendors, or it could be one of the new players. I think in all of those models, though, what operators are going to be looking for is options in those solutions to enable them to optimize their solutions for their particular geography and environment. So I think you're going to see all those models emerging. It's not clear which one will become, the more prevalent one. My suspicion would be that we will consolidate down to purchasing near turnkey solutions from systems integrators, but with then the ability for operators then to customize and optimize based on that. But that's at the moment, that's just a hunch.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm going to look at the integration issue in another panel we've got today. Gil, let me bring you in.
Yes, I can tell you from what I see in the industry right now, from a few commercial engagement that Windover is involved, it really depends on the risk appetite of the operator and the technical capabilities of the operators. Some are more risk adverse, some are less. And based on this, some will be willing and are also more capable. So if we take, for example, the Verizon example of what Verizon did with the 5G RAN deployment, and they're willing to basically drive more forward and take basically a more innovative approach. Okay, and of course they have the capability to do it. I'm also engaged with smaller operators that are very technical savvy and did those things before in the 4G day and driving it forward, versus engagement with other big tier one operator that are looking more into a turnkey solution because they're a lot more risk adverse and willing to take a smaller risk. So it's really about the risk profile of an operator. I think it's a lot influenced by the direction of the executive team in an operator, how much risk they're willing to take. And you really will see it all over the map. I think from one that will continue to buy either a vertically integrated solution or basically go to an SI that will provide them a single neck to choke, if you want to call it, accountability, to one that will be more taking an active role of doing the program management requirements and even some of the integrations on their own.
Thank you, Gil. Well, let me hand right back to Paul, and then we'll come over to Rimma.
I don't think I put risk as being, so high on the agenda. What we're trying to do is deliver the best possible customer experience, and we, for example, we're not going to implement a new architecture just because it's a new architecture. We'll do it because there's a benefit, okay? And that benefit that we're really, really focused on is that end user customer experience. And we're looking at, what's the best way of being able to do that. And taking on development risk is, maybe part of the judgment, but it's not that you're risk averse. It's that how do you do that in the most efficient, cost effective, quality way to deliver that customer experience. And so, I mean, that's the way I look at it. And that risk part is only one. One element. I wouldn't really describe operators, in my experience, as being particularly risk averse.
Thanks, Paul. Well, let me go across and bring Rimma in at this point.
Yep. I wanted to make a slightly different point. So there are a few other players potentially in this, outside of just traditional system integrators or operators doing the integration themselves. We now have hyperscalers who are definitely interested in playing in this space. And there are also some operators, somebody like Rakuten comes to mind, which are thinking of, we've done the development, we've done the integration, why don't we share or sell our solution to other service providers who can benefit from it? So if the environment or if the service ideas are similar to ours, they can benefit from what we've already done. So we absorbed a lot of the cost, but you can have all of the benefits of our learnings and our experience for cost, probably. But those are two other options that are now open for service providers.
Great, thanks, Rimma. Well, thanks everybody for your contributions to that point. Now, another question that isn't going away anytime soon, and that's the issue of assuring interoperability. Now, what is the ecosystem doing to ensure the compatibility and interworking of various solutions from various suppliers? Gil, perhaps I could start by asking you first about what we're doing to ensure interoperability and what work is still to be done.
Sure. So for sure, there is already an interoperability work going on in the community. So if you look at the TIP and the ORAN Alliance, that basically partnered together and doing the different ORAN plug fest, basically to check interoperability between different elements of the disaggregated RAN network. And this is already taking place. I think there is definitely a lot more to be done there between the different vendors in those basically environment, participate more. And a great example during the NFV day was the ETSI NFV plug tests that were happening and really helped the industry to become a lot more mature in this area. So we should really invest, and I think the most important operator lead a lot more of those, sponsor a lot more of those interoperability. And this is really the way to increase this and reduce the friction.
Thank you, Gil. And Paul, you've already mentioned the ORAN Alliance and TIP, and they do a lot of work towards interoperability.
The whole success of Open RAN is going to rely on the fact that those interfaces do remain open. And it's really pleasing to see that the industry is consolidated around the Open RAN Alliance for specifically the Open LAN. The Open RAN Alliance takes in standards from primarily from 3GPP, and one thing we must really guard against is any fracturing in that global standards work, because I think that will would definitely a number of things, but I think a standardized open architecture I think would just fall by the wayside. Maintaining that openness is going to be an ongoing challenge. I mean, there is always going to be pressure to add proprietary functionality into those interfaces for optimization for particular use cases, and so it's going to be an ongoing industry task, and to keep a real focus on that that standardization to remain open. I think plug fests are absolutely vital to prove and focus people's minds on on ensuring that interoperability. And as I mentioned before, the work that TIP does in terms of the integration projects, feeding the results of those back into the Open RAN Alliance through GPP is also very important. And I just see this as an ongoing task. It's not something that we're going to stop and say, yep, this is open now, let's move on. I think it's going to be an ongoing activity to make sure that Open RAN standards and open architecture standards in other parts do actually remain open.
Thank you, Paul. And Rimma, industry associations, plugfests, labs, all do a lot of work here. And as Paul says, is this like ongoing work? This is work that just has to continue in parallel to everything else we're doing with Open RAN?
Yes, absolutely. It does have to continue, but also don't lose that open when you're doing it, right? Because a lot of vendors are probably interested in selling what makes them special, right? The secret sauce. And that's something that can derail these efforts of creating the Open RAN very quickly. And Red Hat, as an open source company, we always advocate for being open, for sharing, for giving back to the community. So that giving back is a crucial part of making this work. So all the interoperability efforts that are happening in the labs that are associated with the industry forums is one thing, but if some of the interop work that's happening in the operators or inside the vendors, between the vendors themselves, if they could give that back to the community, that would actually make this adoption go a lot easier and a lot quicker, in my opinion.
Great, thank you, Rimma. Now, we've been talking about the vendor ecosystem, but there's also the developer ecosystem that's emerging, especially to support the RIC model. Now, we had a whole session devoted to RIC yesterday. Gil, if I could start perhaps with you, how engaged are developers right now? And do you think that the emergence of the RIC will create new opportunities to create and enhance the ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see some newcomers, companies that are basically starting to develop AI ML-based applications to connect into the RIC model. If definitely it's once we'll have a disaggregated virtualized RAN infrastructure, it will provide a lot of capabilities with those applications to run and do all kinds of things that will create more efficiency and more new things that will be introduced. If I were to look talking about open source, talking about open community, looking at what's happening in ORAN software community, I can see that there is some involvement that is happening there and companies that are participating. So it's at the beginning, but it's definitely getting momentum.
Thank you, Gil. Paul, the RIC with its associated R apps and X apps, there's a great potential here, theoretical potential. Do you think we'll see it emerge?
My personal view is I think the RIC is actually the most exciting part of the Open RAN architecture. And the reason for that, it gives us as an operator the ability to optimize and differentiate our network, potentially provide new services. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I think we will see many more developers emerge. I mean, it's quite a specialist thing to be doing. So it's not going to be I think a massive ecosystem, but I think we will see them. We've certainly seen an uptick in the last few months of people looking at particularly X apps. We've spent a lot of time looking at the RIC. In fact, my research program about 30% is really on AI and data science, and a good proportion of that is actually looking at the exploitation of the RIC in X apps or R apps.
Well, 30%, that's an incredible amount of your time there, Paul. And I think you're not alone in being excited about the potential of the RIC. Rimma, you mentioned the RIC earlier in our discussion. What's your thoughts on how this could help with the ecosystem?
Well, it's that's where all the small players can come and contribute, of course, because that's where, you know, they're completely separated, abstracted from the actual hardware layer of the RAN. So, you know, very innovative developers can come in with ideas, new ideas that haven't been tried yet or thought of. But I would want like a word of warning here. This is where the standardization is crucial and most important, because right now, from what I understand, Rick, it's very dependent on who the other side is, right? The DU provider and the radio unit provider is. So they have to integrate. It's like one-to-one relationship even, because there hasn't been enough standardization. It hasn't been, it's not established yet. So that's a problem that still needs to be addressed for it to work, for those apps to actually be portable and applicable across the different deployments, as opposed to, oh, it's only going to work for this one operator.
Thank you, Rimma. Paul, thoughts on ensuring standardization here?
Yeah, the southbound interface out there, the E2 isn't finalised its specification yet, and that does need to happen. I know there's a big focus on doing that, and then there's as I was saying, then what do you do on the northbound interface? So those APIs, how standardised do you need those to be to make life easy, attract a developer community, I think there's still work to do to decide whether you need to standardize those APIs, and if so, how much you need to standardize them to make sure that you get that ecosystem being built. Work to do, but I think it's a really, really exciting area.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Paul. Open RAN offers a tremendous opportunity here, and the RIC in particular for the ecosystem. So we shall be monitoring the situation very closely indeed. For now, though, we're going to draw our discussion to a close. Thank you all very much for participating today and sharing your views and opinions. Now, if you're watching this on day 2 of our TelecomTV Summit on Open RAN, don't forget, send us any questions you have and we'll try and answer them later in our live after show program, and that's at the end of today. And please take part in our online poll. You can find it below this video player window next to the Q&A app. We'll be back tomorrow for the final day of the Open RAN Summit. Until then, thanks for watching and goodbye.